Welcome to the 1600 Sessions, a podcast presented by the White House Historical Association. In each episode, White House Historical Association President Stuart McLaurin interviews luminaries, historians, and eyewitnesses to history about America's most famous residence and office, the White House. We open the doors to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue because it's not only the President's house, it's the people's house. In this episode, we'll be talking about springtime in the White House. In Washington, the beginning of spring is signaled by the blooming of its famous cherry blossoms. The cherry trees were first planted in our nation's capital in 1912 with help from First Lady Helen Taft, and quickly became a symbol of the season. But there are other springtime traditions in the White House, some older and some newer, that are an important part of our history.
There was a congressman from Indiana who introduced a bill to prevent play on the Capitol grounds. So there was actually a law that came into being to prohibit rolling Easter eggs on the Capitol lawn.
Stuart McLaurin interviews Jim McDaniel, former director of the White House Liaison for the National Park Service, and Ellie Schaefer, former director of the White House Visitors Office under President Obama. They talk about the rituals and events that bring countless visitors to Washington and the White House each year to celebrate the beginning of spring.
Welcome to the 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, president of the White House Historical Association. We're here today at the association's offices on historic Lafayette Square on this beautiful spring day, and that's appropriate because in our third episode, we're talking about springtime traditions at the White House. And many of you know that spring is a magical time here in Washington, D.C., and we're honored to talk about those things today with Ellie Schaefer. Ellie was the former director of the White House Visitors Office under President Obama, and she served in that role for all 8 years of the Obama administration. Ellie actually made it her mission during that time to open up the White House to as many people as possible and achieved a great success. We're also joined by Jim McDaniel, who's had a distinguished career of 34 years with the National Park Service. When Jim actually retired in 2002, he was director of the White House Liaison role, which oversees the maintenance and the historic preservation of the White House and historic President's Park. We know him best here as a board member of the association, and he chairs our Endowment Trust Committee and serves as secretary of the association. So I'd like to turn now to the topics at hand and talk about springtime in Washington and springtime in the White House. And as the weather warms up, there are some activities that are nonpartisan, that bring Americans together from across the country and around the world. What is it like in Washington as the weather turns, and do you sense a change in spirit in the town and a change of season or a change of spirit at the White House itself?
Well, I think at the White House for sure. I mean, everybody's been cooped up for months, and everybody's looking forward to being outside. I think the grounds of the White House are just gorgeous in the spring. The events start to happen outside, so there's more press conferences in the Rose Garden, more outdoor events, and so it's almost just it's exciting because I think everybody's got a little bit of cabin fever, so start looking forward to getting outside.
And springtime is when the tour buses start to arrive in Washington. People from all over the country, school children on spring break, and families start showing up in town, and they're excited by the blooming of the cherry blossoms. Of course, they all try to time their visit so that they will be here during that very short period of time when the blossoms are in full bloom. The city really comes alive from a tourism point of view.
Ellie, you gave leadership to the Visitor's Office for 8 years during the Obama administration, and you were deeply involved not just in the tours that were scheduled and people who came through the house, but the orchestration of large outdoor events as well. And I believe 4.5 million people came through the White House in those 8 years, which is extraordinary. And with our White House Visitor Center that we operate with the National Park Service, we toured an additional 3 million or so more. And what goes into making sure that as many people can get through that house as possible, and what's the role of the office in executing these important events on the White House calendar?
So I think that the visitor's office is really the face of the White House. So we do the large events at the White House and the public tours. And because the White House is the only building in the world that is home of the president, office of a president, a museum that's free and open to the public, you're constantly coordinating schedules, getting as many people in as you can, working with all the congressional offices, working with all the internal and external partners. For some of the large events, it's, the events are sized are 35,000 people, 20,000 people. They're not small events and they take a while to plan. So it's those events. On a day-to-day basis, I will say in my 8 years at the White House, no 2 days that I had were the same. Which was amazing and fun and exciting and caused me every gray hair on my head that I have now. But it was a blast and it was a lot of fun. Spring is the busiest time. It's when we had the most requests to come to the White House. I think we had over 100,000 requests in just 1 month to come visit the White House. Obviously, we can't get everybody in, but it's just a really, really fun time, and everybody's here, families, school groups.
Well, you're orchestrating these fun occasions that you've described. How do you coordinate that with the very important events that are taking place in the White House that are more serious or ceremonial in nature, that are happening every day around you in that very small footprint of a house?
So, for example, last year when we were coordinating the Easter egg roll, we were doing a large build on the South Lawn. So the White House is just slightly over 18 acres. Majority of that is the South Lawn, and a lot of those are tents and stages. And so we need a few days to build the tents and stages. At the same time, then President Obama was giving a press conference in the Rose Garden. So we worked with Secret Service, we worked with Parks, we worked with all the different entities on the South Lawn. So we worked right until the cameras came out for his press conference in the Rose Garden. Then we stopped production on the South Lawn. He gave his press conference. Press was escorted off, and then we started production again. So I think you build that in knowing that it's a give and take.
It's all about relationships, isn't it?
It is all about relationships.
In order to make things work, there has to be a balance between not only the roles of the White House, which you mentioned, Ellie, that the White House serves as a home for the First Family. It's a historic house museum open to the public, and it's also a stage for world events. And all three of those roles have to work in balance to have the House work as an icon of democracy.
Jim, I'm interested to know more about the Park Service's role at the White House. How did that originate, and what's that connectivity between the Park Service and the White House?
When the city of Washington was designed and built in the late 1700s and the White House was first built, all of the public buildings and public lands in the District of Columbia were run by a commission. That commission evolved into what became the National Capital Park Office. And this was in 1933. There was a split between the public lands and the public buildings. The public buildings all went to the General Services Administration, and all of the parks and public lands in the district went to the National Park Service. The National Park Service role today revolves around the historic preservation of the building itself, the exterior stone walls, the 18 acres of gardens and grounds around the White House, and the parks in the area, like the Ellipse, Lafayette Park, and the White House Visitor Center. And then the National Park Service also has off-site greenhouse, nursery, and museum storage facilities.
In the role that you held with such great distinction, the White House liaison for the Park Service, and it's now held by our good friend John Stanwich, what is that role, and what does that role take on a day-to-day basis?
The Office of White House Liaison is sort of like a park superintendent in one way, but there's also a staff and political function as well at a fairly high level. The types of employees tell you a lot about what is done in that office. There are laborers, gardeners, tradespeople, architects, engineers, landscape architects, interior designer, museum curators. There's a security officer, a whole range of types of employees that make that function work. There's a very close relationship between the National Park Service and the chief usher of the White House. When I was in that position, the chief usher and I used to meet every day. And then on Friday mornings at 6:30, he and I would just get together and have a cup of coffee and take an hour and be totally open and honest about how the week went, what went wrong, what went right, and then what was coming up.
In taking care of those extraordinary grounds, those 18 acres that are around the White House, were there ever any tense or tedious moments when your care for those grounds may have been threatened by some important activity like the press corps trampling a flower bed or someone wanting to take down a tree for a better camera angle? Were there many anxious moments like that in your memory?
There were some anxious moments. I remember during the Nixon administration, President Nixon wanted to welcome back the returning POWs from Vietnam, and he invited 1,200 people to a dinner. And in the White House, as Ellie knows, you can't accommodate 1,200 people inside. So we set up a tent on the South Lawn, and it was a very fancy, very formal event. But it rained for 3 solid days beforehand. And we tried everything we could. We dug a trench around the tent. We bought every roll of burlap in Washington to try to dry out the grass. We brought in these big industrial blower-type heaters, and we did the best we could, but it was still quite muddy. And when the first guests arrived and the women in their beautiful high heels sunk down 3 or 4 inches into the mud, it was very tense, believe me. But the event went off. It was a beautiful event. It was a very symbolic way for the nation to welcome back these POWs who had given so much and had been hurt so much in the war, and to welcome them home to the USA.
Let's talk a little bit more about the cherry blossoms, and this is at a very important time here in Washington. They're in bloom for about a week each spring, and they predict when they will be at their peak, but it's a guessing game. But from the vantage point of the White House, can you actually see the trees? Can the President and First Lady go out on the Truman balcony and glance and see them themselves?
I don't think you can see them from the Truman balcony, can you?
Well, you can
but there's
see
there's not. There are on the south grounds.
What you can see is the Jefferson Memorial. There's
Yeah.
a beautiful view from the South Portico due south to the Jefferson Memorial and to National Airport beyond. And while you can't see individual trees, there's this beautiful pink hue that's in the foreground around the Jefferson Memorial that you can catch a glimpse of.
I'm still amazed that he had the 6:30 meetings every week.
Would you like to go back and try that out?
That coffee from the little pantry behind the usher's office, I can still taste that coffee. Best I've ever had.
Well, there's actually a history of the White House connectivity to the cherry blossoms with First Lady Helen Taft, who supported the idea in 1909 and worked to get the trees planted in Washington. And cherry trees came to Washington as a memorial of national friendship between us and the Japanese people, but they remain today as a symbol of that friendship and are very popular for international visitors as well. But there's another flower-centric occasion that takes place at the White House every spring, and that's the Spring Garden Tour. Tell us a little bit about that event.
That's a beautiful event, and it's repeated in the fall. I think springtime is really nicer because it's coming from a time of where the grounds and the gardens are sleeping, and then all of a sudden they awaken with beautiful tulips and hydrangea and all of the colors that start appearing in the garden just sort of announce springtime. Probably the most spectacular color in the trees is in the Jacqueline Kennedy Garden with the saucer magnolias that were put in during the Kennedy administration. Those are really beautiful. And then the crab apples in the Rose Garden are also usually in bloom for that. One of the difficulties about timing is if the Easter egg roll and the Spring Garden Tour are too close together, you have a very heavy use of the grounds during the Easter egg roll.
Yeah, we did the Spring Garden Tours once the weekend after the Easter egg roll and vowed never to do that again because of the pressure it puts on the south grounds. But when we did have the Easter egg roll before it, we had to be very careful to not damage the grounds because you have to be careful anyway. But you have to be careful knowing that next week is another large event. Really in 4 days after you had 4 days turnaround. For another 22,000 people to come on the south grounds on Saturday and Sunday. And it was amazing, like how fast the Park Service can, fix things. And guessing on the blooming was always a fun one because, you have to plan so far out. And so you always had to guess when it was going to happen. So I relied on Dale Haney as I did for pretty much everything, to tell us when that was going to happen.
Well, Ellie mentions Dale, and Dale has an important role at the White House. Jim, tell us about Dale's role.
Dale is a horticulturist by training, and he is the head of the White House Gardens and Grounds Division. Dale's a wonderful guy because not only is he technically proficient at anything horticultural, but his personality is so easygoing, so nice to work with. He's just a real, genuinely solid person to work with. There was one time when even Dale Haney and the Park Service crew could not get the grounds to recover in time. And that was, we had a spring garden tour, and I can't remember which administration it was, but the president was at Camp David, and he was called back at the last minute for an emergency. This was on a Sunday morning. So the people who went to the garden tour on Saturday saw beautiful fields of tulips. But when the president came back on Sunday morning, the helicopter came in a little too low and blew every petal off every tulip on the south lawn. And so the folks that came in on Sunday afternoon did not see anything but stems.
So, Jim, Mother Nature is not on the White House staff. Did you ever have to do anything creative to get something to bloom on cue?
Well, I remember one time there was a state dinner coming up for the Prime Minister of Japan, and the timing was not quite coinciding with the blossoming of the cherry blossoms. And so the thought was, how can we have the Japanese Prime Minister come to Washington in the spring and not enjoy cherry blossoms? So the White House Grounds group took some cherry trees, put them in huge pots, and brought them into the greenhouse several weeks before the visit, and controlled the humidity and lighting and all of the things, the watering, everything they had to do to force the cherry trees to be in full bloom on the day of the state dinner. And when I saw the trucks leaving the greenhouse with all of these trees in them wrapped in burlap, I said to the men, drive really slow. We don't want any of those blossoms blowing off. But the White House, the ground floor looked spectacular that night with cherry trees in full bloom with little twinkle lights in them. And the Japanese Prime Minister was very, very pleased.
Well, we've alluded to this famous White House Easter egg roll, and it's an extraordinary occasion that takes place on the Monday after Easter each year, and itself has a long and storied tradition. It is a significant part of White House history going back to the 1880s. What is an Easter egg roll? Not people across America may be familiar with hiding Easter eggs or having eggs in an Easter basket, but what is this thing called an Easter egg roll on the White House lawn?
Yeah, I didn't know what it was until I got here. So I'm with them on the hiding, because I kept saying Easter egg hunt, and they're like, Easter egg roll. I was like, what? What is this thing? So we do lanes for all the kids, almost 30 lanes, and the kids take a wooden spoon and roll hard-boiled Easter eggs down these lanes, and it's a race essentially, and they love it. Everybody has a blast. You see kids doing it of all ages. You see some adults doing it every once in a while. It's a lot of fun. So it's a fun event.
So, Jim, the White House Easter egg roll has a history. It didn't always occur at the White House. There was a time where it occurred somewhere else.
Yes, during the Rutherford B. Hayes administration, several congressmen were concerned because kids would show up at the Capitol on the Monday after Easter every year, and they would roll Easter eggs down the Capitol lawn, and they would play and do what kids do. And so there formed this attitude of, hey, kids, go somewhere else. And there was a congressman from Indiana who took the lead and introduced a bill to prevent play on the Capitol grounds. And the bill was passed and signed off by the president, and so there was actually a law that came into being to prohibit rolling Easter eggs on the Capitol lawn. Well, the year after that law was passed, it rained, so that there wasn't a problem, nobody showed up. But the following year, the kids showed up again, and the Capitol Police chased them away. And so they worked their way down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House, where there was another sloping hill, and they thought that might work, and so they started rolling eggs on the White House lawn, and Rutherford B. Hayes came out and thought it was great, welcomed them, and that was the beginning of the White House Easter egg roll. They came back there every year.
And didn't they actually sneak inside on some occasions as well?
They did. The White House in those days didn't have the element of security that it does today. It was a very open place. People would come and go. And so kids and parents would wander inside and look around, and the president actually set them up in the East Room to do their egg rolling there if they wanted to do it there as well. The problem in the East Room was that the hard-boiled eggs would get ground into the carpet and cause a mess, and so they were encouraged to go back out, but they were welcomed on the White House lawn and still are today.
You'd be in big trouble at your 6:30 a.m. meeting about that one.
Kids are sharp, and local kids who were looking to make a little 25 cents to buy some potato chips and a Coke or something would, because you could do it in those days, they would stand outside and rent themselves out to adults who just wanted to get in the gates and see what it was like. And of course, they would go in and then they would slip out, leave the adults in there and go pick up another adult and go in. The guards got wise to them and then eventually, figured to look for them and shoo them out, but they were entrepreneurial.
Now, like all events at the White House, even though they may be traditional, they take on a different character and personality related to the President and First Lady that are overseeing this particular year's events. Give us a little insight into how it takes on the flavor of President and Mrs. Obama in your case.
So the Easter egg roll is the largest event, at the White House. For us, the last year we ticketed about 37,000 people. My first year, in my first meeting, I had said, how do people get tickets? And one of the people from the parks had said, folks line up down on the ellipse. It's a first come, first serve. They camp out. They wait for, 3 or 4 days sometimes. And, they may or may not get tickets. And so when I had relayed this, especially to the President and First Lady, they, being parents, were not so thrilled about this concept. And they said, we can't do that to kids. We can't do that to parents. We need to do something. So what I came up with was, the lottery. And so what we did is it's really at this point, worldwide lottery. Anybody can enter. And it was wildly successful. It was great. And it opened it up to a whole group of people that wouldn't necessarily have access to an event at the White House that the President and the First Lady attend. So that was one of the main thing that we brought. We also changed the entry and the exit, which is a little wonky to get into, but we essentially made an experience down on the ellipse. We had different stages. We had 8 different stages, everything from main music, where we had everybody from, Justin Bieber performed, and we had a reading stage where we had like J.K. Rowling's reading. We had a basketball court where we had like Shaquille O'Neal playing basketball with the kids. We had tennis courts where we had, everybody from Chris Everett come in and play tennis with the kids. We had the egg roll lanes, the egg hunt lanes. We had science areas where kids could come in and build boats to see if they floated or not. And just a bunch of different stages during each 2-hour festival. And I think that was the thing that we really wanted to give everybody an experience. One year was the 5th anniversary of the First Lady's Let's Move initiative. And we worked with the So You Think You Can Dance cast, and they did a Let's Move, Give Me 5 dance that everybody could learn, and then we released it on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and the First Lady went on.
Would you like to give us a little example of that?
I can totally, I can still do it, and every time I hear the song, I'm like, yes, I know it. And
so they were personally involved as President and First Lady.
Both of them were,
and
absolutely.
Beginning the presidency, their girls were young and probably interested in their friends and coming and participating.
Oh yeah, particularly the first year, everybody was on board and out dancing and participating and playing basketball or reading or whatnot. A couple years, the President and the First Lady would read together. Sometimes they read as a family with Sasha Malia and Bo. Every once in a while, he would make an appearance out on the grounds. And First Lady would come down, and dance or introduce one of the acts on stage. We also had a chef stage, so the First Lady often participated in that, teaching kids how to, cook healthy meals. We really tried to incorporate the garden into a lot of our Easter egg roll. So, we'd talk about vegetables and, things, fruits and healthy eating. fun
And there's
thing.
a very special souvenir that the young kids get to take away and that we're a party to, and helping to sell these to provide funding for our nonprofit, nonpartisan mission to support so much of the work at the White House. What is that special souvenir, and how is it determined?
The famed wooden egg.
And why is it a wooden egg?
I think it was during Reagan's administration, they went back and switched them over to wooden eggs. The wooden eggs are cool. They're a fun souvenir, and kids love them. Parents do too, and presidential collectors love them. They're a really fun souvenir. I will often go over to people's house, and they'll have a little egg sitting on the mantle, and they'll say, I went to the Easter egg roll. It was so much fun, and it's a really fun souvenir of the day.
What's your favorite Easter egg roll memory from your 8 years there?
I think, my favorite Easter egg roll memory was the first year where I had put so much time and effort into planning the Easter egg roll, thinking about festivities, thinking about activities that everybody was going to like, working so hard on the talent and, just putting your heart and soul into everything 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and seeing the kids get the biggest joy from just rolling down the hill with nothing. And I was like, I put all, this effort and, into this. And it just kind of reminded me that people are just so happy to be on the South grounds of the White House. Oftentimes we make it more complicated. It's not a complicated event. We're the ones that make it complicated. That the kids just get the joy of just rolling down the hill. And that was actually just a really, really fun time. So,
Jim, you have to have some favorite memories.
I as Ellie's talking, I'm thinking the same exact thing. I was thinking how dramatically the nature of the event has changed and how much more activity there is and how many more children are involved. But yet one thing remains the same, and that is that it's all about kids. It's kids having a good time. Kids are the priority on that day. And that's the beauty of the event. And her vision of kids rolling down the hill with no toys, with no props, just being themselves rolling down the hill. That's my favorite memory as well. When you think back to the 70s, when I was involved in helping put it together, it was basically myself and my secretary who put all the entertainment together.
Oh, how times have changed.
We had Christian the magician, we had a juggler, we had Ukrainian Easter egg decorators, but it was like a little country fair, and it was mostly local people who attended. And now it's much more open to a wider segment of the American population, and there's much more activity involved. But still, it remains an event whose priority is kids having a good time.
Well, Ellie, you shared some of the celebrities that have participated, that are performing artists and others who've been readers. But there's one celebrity that's a common appearance at every Easter egg roll, and it's a costume personality. Tell us about that.
Ebotus, the Easter Bunny of the United States. So the Easter Bunny comes and makes a special appearance. So it's not officially the White House Easter egg roll until a member of the first family blows the whistle to get it started, is what, I don't know. I think that's right.
Yeah.
I'm going with it.
Ceremonial whistle.
The ceremonial whistle. Dale hands them the ceremonial whistle. But until then, they're up on the balcony, and they're joined by the Easter Bunny of the United States, comes out with the first family and does a little wave. And we've had a lot of fun with it over the years. I think
Has
there's
it
been
classified who the Easter Bunny is?
It's different every year. So it is not classified. And we've had some really good time. We had White House staff was the Easter Bunny. My uncle was the Easter Bunny one year. My wife was the Easter Bunny one year. Former staff, husband of a staff person.
And the current White House press secretary was Easter Bunny.
He was an Easter Bunny. So it's a lot of fun. It's quite the honor, I will say. And there's a lot of competition for it. I had people coming in my office and auditioning, which was fun. I had somebody send me their resume of being costume characters, along with showing me magic tricks that they could do.
So you talked about the simplicity of these events, but also the complexity of all the orchestration and coordination that things like this take. How far in advance do you begin working on the Easter egg roll each year?
Well, we used to start right afterwards. We would do a post-event meeting with everybody concerned and go through what worked and what didn't work. And and start making some notes for adjustments the following year. That's assuming it was the next year of an ongoing administration. When the administrations changed, the planning started from the beginning. Each administration likes to put their own stamp on an event like that, and so you have to kind of start at the very beginning.
Yeah, I think we would start, a year out, pulling the permit, for the event, and then really start planning. And I think the hard part about the White House is that it's so busy, and no matter what you plan, there's always a current crisis. And so we would have to start so early out to just try to get on everybody's radar.
So Ellie, you talk about planning for a egg roll that goes on a year in advance, but there's one thing you can't always plan for, and that's the weather. How do you anticipate that, and what are some of the contingencies that you have? And do you have any interesting stories about the weather and the Easter egg roll?
Yeah, so my first year in 2009, it snowed in the morning, and I was mortified. But we made it through. And it was really my second year. There was a big, big rainstorm that was coming in. And I ended up staying up all night, looking at the weather, talking to the National Weather Service. I showed up for work next morning, and I basically looked like I had been up for 24 hours. And I remember Dale Haney looked at me, and he's like, "Why? What is going on with you?" And I said, "Oh, I stayed up all night to, watch the weather." And he just looked at me, and he's like, "Why? You can't change it." I was like, he's like, "You just have to plan for it." And it was so funny because it was like so simple. And I had just, completely, wound myself in knots, over the weather. And after that, it was, you just plan for it. And so over the 8 years that we had the Easter egg roll, we had everything from snow to 92-degree weather and everything in between. Sleet, rain, wind. We had a windstorm one year, you name it. And our attendance varied less than 1,000 each of those years. So what I also learned is that no matter what the weather is, people will come, and they'll show up. They want to be there, and they don't care what the weather is. They're just so excited to be on the south grounds of the White House.
We've been talking about a White House tradition with the Easter egg roll that goes back for over 130 years, and the personal stamp that each president and first lady put on that, and how it's executed. But there are more recent traditions as well, with one in the Obama administration, and that was the private Passover Seder for family, friends, and staff. How did that tradition begin at the White House?
So that tradition really stemmed from the campaign. The president was then Senator Obama, and he was on the campaign trail, and there was a bunch of staff. I was not there, but there was a bunch of staff who was having a Seder dinner, and they invited him, and he participated. And they decided to keep that tradition going inside the White House, and never really made it much bigger than that kind of small group of folks, and didn't give in to the pressure to make it a huge, White House event.
Where was it held in the White House?
It was held in the Old Family Dining Room, which was opened up to the tour route in 2015.
Right. With
Yeah, for the first
appreciation to
time.
you and Mrs. Obama for that. That was
So-
a great addition.
Yeah, so it was there. So as you know, from seeing it, it's not a very large room in the first place, and so there wasn't the ability to put any more people in there. So they'd keep it to around 20 folks, which was it was really neat.
Well, as I've worked closely with both of you, my list in this question would be very long for both of you. But what do you see as your proudest accomplishment in the role and the time that you had in each of your respective roles at the White House?
I think, for me, it would probably be the Easter egg roll and it's being set up. That's, probably one of the largest ones. We redid a little more on the wonky side, the whole scheduling system for the public tours. When I started, about 2% of all public tours being requested were being accepted. And when I left, we were in the high 40s.
I think when I look back, the activity or the project that gives me the most pride is the opening of the White House Visitor Center. When we first opened that in 1995, after working with Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon on the funding and going through a lot of negotiations with GSA and the Commerce Department, it was such an important step for White House visitors because for the first time, people who could not make the narrow window of opportunity for a tour had a place to go that was a surrogate, an alternative. For people who did go through the tour and wanted to learn something more about the White House, they had a place to go. The White House is such an important icon for Americans to be able to come close to it, to go up to the fence, to see it, to go through the grounds on Easter egg roll or garden tours. It gives them a touchstone for their government, their democracy. It's a place where we have unique access, and to the extent that we can continue to provide that, I think it's really important and it's healthy for our democracy.
Well, Ellie Schaefer and Jim McDaniel, I want to thank you both for your service, your leadership, and your legacy, and all that you've contributed to make the White House the great house of our president and house of the people that it is. And we're really appreciative of all that you've continued to do with us here at the White House Historical Association.
You've been listening to the 1600 Sessions. This podcast is presented by the White House Historical Association and produced by Long Story Short Media. You can subscribe or download new episodes at the1600sessions.org. You can also learn more about the springtime traditions you've heard about today at whitehousehistory.org. Thanks again to Jim McDaniel and Ellie Schaefer. And thank you to the U.S. Marine Band. You're listening to them perform John Philip Sousa's March Easter Monday at the White House. Sousa loved playing music for the festivities each year and composed this piece in 1929 to honor the event. The U.S. Marine Band has provided music for the White House Easter egg roll since 1889, and they provided the music for this podcast.